Two thugs laughed as they kicked a defenseless waitress in a dark alley, telling her nobody cares about a nobody like her. But the blood drained from their faces when footsteps stopped behind them, and they turned to see the city's most feared mafia boss rolling up his sleeves. They had just made the last mistake of their lives. They didn't know the girl they were beating was Giulio Malone's daughter. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The punch came before Olivia Malone even saw it. Her head snapped sideways, stars exploding behind her eyes as her body crashed against the dumpster in the alley behind Rosie's diner. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth instantly. Big mistake, listening to conversations that don't concern you, the taller thug growled, his partner already moving to block her escape route back to the diner. Olivia's fingers scrambled against the rough brick wall, trying to push herself upright, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her entire body screamed danger, but no sound escaped her lips, just ragged, panicked breathing. This was supposed to be a normal Tuesday night. Close the diner at 11, walk to her car, go home. Simple. Safe. But she'd heard them talking in booth 7. Names, locations, money changing hands. And now they knew she'd heard. Please, she managed to whisper, tasting copper. I won't. The second punch cut off her words. Pain exploded across her cheekbone, and the world tilted violently. Her knees hit the pavement hard, the impact sending fresh agony shooting through her legs. The yellow uniform dress Rosie required, the one that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life, tore at the shoulder as rough hands shoved her face first into the filthy alley floor. Nobody cares about waitresses, the shorter one laughed, his boot pressing between her shoulder blades. You think anyone's coming for you? The kicks started then. Ribs, back, shoulders. Olivia tried to curl into herself, to protect her vital organs the way her mother had taught her years ago during their one and only self-defense conversation. But there were two of them, and her body could only shield so much. Make sure she doesn't remember anything, the tall one said, his voice distant through the roaring in her ears. Through the haze of agony, Olivia thought of her father, the man she hadn't spoken to in 3 years, the man who'd left to protect her from his world, or so he'd claimed in the single letter he'd sent after her mother's funeral. I should have called him, she thought as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. Just once, just to hear his voice. That's when she heard it, the footsteps. Not running, not rushing, walking, with the confidence of someone who owned whatever space they entered. The beating stopped abruptly. Through swollen eyes, Olivia saw both men straighten, their cocky smirks fading as they turned toward the newcomer. A man in an expensive black suit stood at the alley entrance, his tattooed hands flexing slowly at his sides. Even in her semi-conscious state, Olivia recognized something in his posture, controlled violence, barely leashed. The streetlight behind him cast his face in shadow, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the deliberate way he rolled his neck once, twice, like a fighter preparing for a match he knew he'd win. The thugs recognized it too. One took an involuntary step backward. Walk away, the tall thug tried, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. This doesn't concern you. The man in the suit took 3 steps forward, and the light finally caught his face. Olivia's breath hitched. Giulio Malone, her father. He looked older than she remembered, more lines around his eyes, more gray in his dark hair, but the intensity was the same. That barely contained fury she'd seen once before, when a boyfriend had raised his voice to her at 16. The boy had apologized so profusely afterward that Olivia had been confused for days about what her father had said to him. Now she understood. Julio's gaze dropped to her battered face, and something shifted in his expression, grief and fury colliding in real time. When he looked back at the thugs, his eyes had gone completely cold. Touch her again, he said quietly, his voice carrying perfect clarity despite its softness. I dare you. The shorter thug actually reached for something in his jacket, a weapon. Probably, but Giulio moved faster than either of them anticipated. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next, his fist connected with the shorter man's jaw with a sickening crack. The thug crumpled. His partner lunged forward, but Giulio sidestepped with practiced ease, catching the man's arm and twisting it behind his back with mechanical precision. The thug screamed, "Who sent you?" Julio's voice was conversational, almost bored. I don't. Giulio twisted harder. Another scream. Who sent you? Dante Rigo, he said. The thug gasped, his words tumbling out in panic. He said she heard too much at the diner, said to make sure she couldn't talk. We didn't know she was yours. Julio released him so suddenly the man nearly fell. Now you do. Both thugs scrambled backward, the conscious one dragging his semi-conscious partner toward the alley's exit. Tell Dante, Julio called after them, his voice still eerily calm, that I'll be seeing him very soon. They disappeared into the night, their footsteps echoing frantically against pavement. Only then did Julio kneel beside Olivia, his hands still clenched into fists a moment ago, now gentle as they brushed hair from her bloodied face. "Livy," he whispered, and she heard it clearly, the crack in his armor. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Olivia tried to speak, but darkness rushed up to claim her. The last thing she heard was her father's voice, raw with emotion she'd never heard from him before. "I've got you, baby girl. I've got you." Julio Malone cradled his daughter against his chest as sirens wailed in the distance, sirens he'd called himself, breaking a 20-year streak of never involving police in his business. But this wasn't business. This was Olivia. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her face a mess of blood and bruises that made his hands shake with a rage so profound it terrified even him. He'd killed men for less than this, destroyed entire operations over insults that paled in comparison to what those animals had done to his little girl. "Boss." Julio looked up to see Vincent emerging from the shadows, his second in command followed by 3 more men. They must have been trailing him standard protocol he'd implemented years ago but rarely needed. Vincent's face went pale when he saw Olivia. "Mother of God. Is that my daughter?" Julio's voice cracked on the word. "They beat my daughter." The 4 men stood frozen, shocked into silence. In 15 years of service, Vincent had never seen his boss hold anything with such tenderness. They all knew Julio had a child rumor and whispered speculation, but none had ever seen her. None had known he kept this close a watch on someone outside the organization. "Get Dr. Reeves," Julio ordered, his composure reassembling itself like armor clicking back into place. "Have him meet us at Mercy General, and I want every camera within 6 blocks of this diner pulled. Every single frame." "Already done, boss." Vincent was on his phone immediately. "And Vincent?" Julio looked up, his eyes burning with cold purpose. "Find out everything about Dante Rigo, where he sleeps, where he eats, who he loves. I want his entire life mapped out by morning." Vincent nodded once and melted back into the shadows with 2 of the men. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes later, faster than usual, because the 911 dispatcher had recognized Julio's voice and understood that delays would not be tolerated. Paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher, but Julio refused to release Olivia until they were inside the vehicle. Only then did he carefully, gently, lay her down on the white sheets that immediately began soaking up her blood. Possible concussion, broken ribs, facial trauma. One paramedic assessed quickly, checking her vitals. "Blood pressure stable. We need to move now." Julio climbed into the ambulance without asking permission. The paramedic opened his mouth to protest, caught sight of Julio's expression, and wisely remained silent. As the ambulance screamed through city streets, Julio held Olivia's hand, her small, delicate hand that used to grip his finger when she was a baby. The memory hit him like a physical blow. "She has your eyes," Maria had whispered in the delivery room, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me she'll never see the things those eyes have seen." He'd made that promise 18 years ago, and he'd kept it obsessively, ruthlessly, for 15 years. Private school in the suburbs, far from downtown, careful monitoring of every friend, every boyfriend, every teacher, money funneled through legitimate channels to ensure she never wanted for anything while never knowing where it came from. When Maria died 3 years ago, Julio had wanted to bring Olivia home, to protect her properly, openly. But Maria's final words echoed in his dying moments. Let her be normal. Let her have the life we never could. So he'd stepped back, watched from a distance, let her believe he'd chosen his empire over her, because that pain was cleaner than the truth. He loved her too much to let his world consume her the way it had consumed him, but his protection had failed. She'd been working at that diner, a place he'd never have allowed if he'd known in a neighborhood he'd thought was safe, and those animals had put their hands on her, had beaten her unconscious in a filthy alley like she was nothing, like she didn't have a father who would burn the entire city down to avenge her. His phone buzzed. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. "Talk," Julio answered. "Dante Rigo, 34 years old. Runs a mid-level gambling and protection operation on the south side. Been expanding aggressively the last 6 months, stepping on a lot of toes." Vincent's voice was clinical, efficient. "He's got connections to dirty cops, a few city councilmen. Thinks he's untouchable. Why Olivia? Best we can figure? She waited his table tonight. He and his crew were discussing the Patterson warehouse job the hijacking set for Thursday. Your daughter was refilling coffee. They thought she overheard. Julio's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. A warehouse job. They'd nearly killed his daughter over a goddamn warehouse job. Did she? Doesn't matter, does it? No, it didn't matter. Whether Olivia had heard their plans or not, they'd made the decision to hurt her, to silence her, to treat her like she was disposable. That was enough. I want Dante's entire operation mapped by dawn, Julio said quietly. Every dealer, every enforcer, every dirty cop on his payroll. I want financial records, property holdings, mistresses, gambling debts, everything. And Vincent? Do this quietly. No one knows we're coming until we're already there. Understood, boss? Vincent hesitated. The men are asking, what are we doing? Julio looked down at his daughter's bruised face, at the dried blood in her dark hair, at the purple marks forming around her throat where one of those animals had grabbed her. We're teaching this city a lesson it's forgotten, he said softly. That Julio Malone's mercy is a gift, not a guarantee. And that gift has conditions. What conditions? Don't touch what's mine. He ended the call as the ambulance pulled into Mercy General's emergency bay. Doctors and nurses were already waiting. Dr. Reeves had ensured the best trauma team was on standby. As they wheeled Olivia away, a nurse tried to stop Julio from following into the restricted area. He looked at her once. She stepped aside. The fluorescent lights in the emergency wing hummed with a sterile coldness that matched the fear coiling in Julio's chest. He stood outside the examination room, arms crossed, jaw tight, while doctors worked on his daughter behind closed doors. Every muffled sound, every urgent instruction, every beep of machinery sent his blood pressure climbing. Vincent appeared at his elbow, holding a cup of black coffee Julio didn't remember asking for. Dr. Reeves says she's stable, Vincent offered quietly. Concussion, 3 cracked ribs, facial contusions. Could have been worse. Could have been nothing, Julio snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. Vincent wasn't the enemy here. Sorry. I know, boss. They stood in silence. 2 men who'd faced down rival gangs and federal investigations without flinching, now rendered helpless by hospital protocol and locked doors. The examination room finally opened. Dr. Reeves emerged, pulling off latex gloves, his expression carefully neutral in the way of physicians delivering news they knew would be received badly. She's awake, he said, confused and in pain but coherent. No internal bleeding, no fractures beyond the ribs. She'll heal. The relief that flooded through Julio nearly buckled his knees. Can I see her? Dr. Reeves hesitated. Mr. Malone? She's been through significant trauma. She's asking questions. About what happened. About you. His voice dropped lower. The police are on their way. Assault cases require reports. Handle it, Julio said simply. I'll try, but handle it. Dr. Reeves nodded, recognizing the tone that ended discussions, not started them. Room 347. But Julio? Gently. She's scared. Julio moved past him without responding. Room 347 was private, the best Mercy General offered, with windows overlooking the city lights. Olivia lay in the hospital bed, her face a topography of bruises, an IV line running into her left arm. Her eyes were closed, but he could tell from her breathing she wasn't asleep. Livy, he said softly. Her eyes opened, those hazel eyes so much like her mother's, and focused on him with an intensity that made him feel exposed in ways gun battles never had. You came, she whispered, her voice rough from screaming earlier. Of course I came. Why? The question cut deeper than any blade. You haven't called in 3 years. Haven't visited. I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought you didn't want me anymore. Julio moved to her bedside, his large frame seeming too big, too dangerous for the delicate machinery of healing surrounding her. He wanted to hold her hand, but wasn't sure he had the right. I never stopped wanting you, he said, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. Your mother made me promise to keep you away from my world, from what I am. I thought distance would protect you. Distance? Olivia's laugh was bitter, broken. I lived in fear that you'd forgotten about me, that I didn't matter enough for even a phone call on my birthday. I called. She blinked. What? Every birthday. Every Christmas. I called the diner, pretended to be a customer, just to hear your voice. Julio's hands clenched at his sides. I paid your rent through a management company, made sure you had shifts when tips were good. Had people watching to make sure you were safe. Olivia stared at him, processing. The landlord who never raised rent. Works for me. And Rosie, giving me prime shifts. On my payroll. All this time? Her voice trembled with something between anger and anguish. You were there, watching, but never just being my father? I was trying to be your father. Just from far enough away that my world wouldn't touch yours. He finally reached out, carefully taking her hand. I failed. I'm sorry. Tears spilled down her bruised cheeks. Who were those men? Why did they made a mistake, Julio said, his voice hardening. They thought you overheard something you shouldn't have. They thought silencing you was acceptable. Were they right? Did I hear something? Doesn't matter now. It matters to me. Olivia tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. I served them coffee, Dad. Just coffee. And they almost killed me over it. What kind of world do you live in where that makes sense? The word Dad hit him like a confession. She hadn't called him that since before Maria died. A world I never wanted you to know, he admitted. But now that you do. A sharp knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by a man in a cheap suit that screamed detective, despite the lack of badge showing. Miss Malone, I'm Detective Warren, the man said, his eyes flicking nervously to Julio before settling on Olivia. I need to ask you some questions about the assault. No, Julio said flatly. Sir, this is standard procedure. My daughter has a concussion. She's in pain. Your questions can wait until morning. Actually, sir, assaults of this nature require immediate. Julio stood, his full height and presence filling the room with unspoken threat. Detective Warren, you're going to leave this room. You're going to file a report that says my daughter was attacked by unknown assailants. And tomorrow, when she's rested, you'll come back with better timing and worse odds of annoying me. Warren's face flushed. Are you threatening an officer of... I'm stating facts. Julio pulled out his phone, dialed, and handed it to the detective. Here. Captain Morrison wants to talk to you. Warren's flush deepened, but he took the phone. Whatever he heard in the next 30 seconds drained the color from his face entirely. He handed the phone back, muttered something about following up tomorrow, and practically fled. The nurse, wisely, followed. Olivia watched this exchange with wide eyes. What are you? Julio sat back down, suddenly looking every one of his 46 years. I'm a man who protects what's his, he said quietly. And you, Olivia, are mine, my daughter, my blood, and anyone who forgets that learns exactly what I'm capable of. I'm scared, she whispered. Good, Julio said, squeezing her hand gently. Fear keeps you careful, but you're not scared alone anymore. Understand? She nodded slowly, then asked the question that changed everything. What happens now? Julio's expression hardened into something ancient and unforgiving. Now? Now they learn who your father is. The sun hadn't yet broken over the city skyline when Julio walked out of Mercy General, leaving 2 of his men stationed outside Olivia's room, with explicit instructions. No one gets in without his approval. Vincent was waiting by the car, phone pressed to his ear, his expression grim. Talk, Julio said as he slid into the back seat. We found them. Vincent ended his call and handed Julio a tablet displaying 2 surveillance photos. Miguel Torres and Frank Russo, low-level muscle for Dante's crew. Torres has priors for assault, Russo for armed robbery. They've been bragging about the job since they left the alley. Julio studied the faces, memorizing every feature, every detail. These were the hands that had hurt his daughter. These were the voices that had mocked her while she bled. Where? Torres is holed up at his girlfriend's place in Riverside. Russo's at a motel on Fletcher Avenue. Vincent paused. They're planning to skip town by noon. Dante's paying them to disappear until things cool down. Things aren't going to cool down. Julio's voice was ice. Where's Dante? His club? The Red Door? He's conducting business like nothing happened, boss. He doesn't know we're coming. Good. Let's keep it that way. Julio handed back the tablet. Torres first. I want them both alive. We do this clean, no bodies, no evidence, just fear and confessions. Vincent nodded, relaying instructions through his phone as the car pulled into morning traffic. The apartment complex in Riverside was the kind of place where residents knew better than to ask questions. Peeling paint, broken security cameras, and an elevator that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. Julio took the stairs 3 at a time, Vincent and 2 others flanking him. Apartment 4C. Vincent positioned men at both ends of the hallway while Julio stood before the door. He didn't knock. A single kick near the lock sent it crashing inward. Miguel Torres barely had time to roll off the couch and off the terrified woman who'd been pinned beneath him before Julio was across the room, his hand wrapped around Torres's throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. "Remember me?" Julio asked conversationally. Torres's eyes went wide with recognition and terror. "Oh God, Malone, I didn't know. Didn't know she was my daughter?" Julio's grip tightened. "Or didn't know you'd get caught. Please, man," Dante said. "Tell me everything," Dante said. "Every word, every instruction. And if I think you're lying, even once, I'll drop you off that balcony and call it an accident." The words tumbled out of Torres in a panicked rush. Dante had been at the diner conducting business, finalizing plans for hijacking a shipment from the Patterson warehouse. Olivia had been their waitress, refilling coffee, cleaning nearby tables. Dante convinced himself she'd been listening too carefully, understanding too much. He said she was a problem. Torres gasped. Julio's hand still crushing his windpipe, said to scare her quiet. It wasn't supposed to go that far, I swear. But it did. Julio released him suddenly, letting Torres collapse to the floor, gasping. "You beat an unarmed woman unconscious in an alley. You laughed while you did it. I'm sorry." "You're not sorry. You're scared." Julio crouched down, his face inches from Torres's. "But you will be sorry. You'll be so sorry you'll beg for prison as protection from what's coming." Vincent appeared with zip ties, securing Torres's hands behind his back with efficient brutality. "The girlfriend?" one of the men asked, nodding toward the woman cowering in the corner. "Let her go," Julio said. "She hasn't seen anything worth remembering." "Have you?" The woman shook her head frantically and bolted for the door. "One down," Vincent said. "Russo next." Julio nodded, pulling out his phone as they dragged Torres toward the car. The motel on Fletcher Avenue was somehow worse than the apartment a pay-by-the-hour establishment where the desk clerk was paid to forget faces. Frank Russo had just stepped out of the shower when his door exploded inward. He managed to grab a towel before Vincent's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling across the stained carpet. Two more men hauled him upright, and then Julio stepped into the room. Russo's face went from confused to terrified in the span of a heartbeat. "No, wait, I can explain. Explain how you kicked my daughter while she was on the ground." Julio's voice was surgical in its precision. "Explain the part where you grabbed her hair and threatened to make sure she didn't remember anything." "Malone, please, it was just business." "Business?" The word came out like a curse. Julio crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing Russo by the throat and slamming him into the mirror. Glass shattered. "My daughter's face looks like a war zone. 3 cracked ribs. A concussion. That's not business. That's personal." Dante ordered it. It was all Dante. "I know." Julio released him, stepping back as Vincent moved in with more zip ties. "That's why you're still breathing. You're going to tell the police everything, every detail. You're going to describe exactly what Dante told you to do, and why. He'll kill me. He'll try." Julio's smile was colder than his anger. "But he's going to be too busy worrying about what I'm going to do to him. And Russo, what I'm going to do to Dante will make prison look like paradise." Within 20 minutes, both Torres and Russo were secured in a warehouse on the east side, the same warehouse where Julio had conducted hundreds of interrogations over the years. But this time felt different. This time, it wasn't business. Julio stood before them, 2 men zip-tied to chairs, their faces already swelling from the collection process. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Tell me everything about Dante's operation. Every location, every corrupt cop, every politician he's bought. Give me his empire on a silver platter, and maybe you'll live to see retirement in a federal prison." Torres broke first, then Russo, their confessions tumbling over each other in desperate competition. Vincent recorded everything. When they were done, Julio made a single phone call. "Captain Morrison, I have 2 men who want to confess to assault and battery. They have information about Dante Rigo you'll find very interesting." He paused. "Yes, I'll deliver them personally. 1 hour." He ended the call and looked at Vincent. "Prepare the men. Tonight, we visit the Red Door. How many should I bring?" Julio's expression was carved from stone. "All of them." The Red Door nightclub pulsed with bass-heavy music and red neon that painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. It was Dante Rigo's kingdom, or at least, that's what he told himself as he sat in the VIP section, surrounded by sycophants and muscle. Dante was a big fish in a small pond who'd convinced himself he was a shark. At 34, he'd built a respectable mid-tier operation, through aggression and opportunism, filling power vacuums left by smarter men who'd moved on or died. Protection rackets, illegal gambling, loan sharking, nothing sophisticated, but profitable enough to fund his lifestyle and his ego. Tonight, he was celebrating. "To expansion," he announced, raising his glass of overpriced scotch. His 5 closest men echoed the toast, though their smiles seemed forced. "Patterson Warehouse Thursday night. 3 million in electronics. We hit it clean. We're set for the year." "What about the waitress?" one of them asked hesitantly. Dante waved dismissively. "Torres and Russo handled it. She's probably still in the hospital crying to nurses who don't care. Problem solved." What Dante didn't know, what his arrogance wouldn't let him see, was that his empire was already crumbling. At that exact moment, Captain Morrison was processing confessions from Torres and Russo that detailed every corrupt cop on Dante's payroll. Federal agents were drafting warrants based on financial records Vincent's hackers had anonymously provided. And 3 city councilmen who'd accepted Dante's bribes were receiving polite visits from men who suggested immediate resignations might be healthy. But Dante, insulated by ego and ignorance, drank his scotch and planned his future. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something, instinct or fate, made him accept the call. "Dante Rigo?" The voice was unfamiliar, cold, professional. "Who's asking?" "Someone who wants you to look at the front door of your club. Right now." Dante's gut clenched. He stood, pushing through the VIP section toward the balcony overlooking the main floor. Below, the crowd continued dancing, oblivious, but at the entrance, the bouncer was talking urgently into his radio, his face pale. "What am I looking at?" Dante demanded into the phone. "Your future, or lack thereof." The front doors opened. Julio Malone walked in. Not rushed, not aggressive, just walking, his black suit immaculate, his tattooed hands loose at his sides. Behind him, Vincent and 15 others filed in with the precision of soldiers spreading out, covering exits, their presence turning the club's energy from celebration to dread in seconds. The music died mid-beat. Someone had cut the sound system. In the sudden silence, Julio's footsteps echoed like gunshots as he crossed the dance floor toward the stairs leading to VIP. "Jesus Christ," Dante whispered, his scotch glass slipping from nerveless fingers and shattering on the floor. "That's Julio Malone." "Yes," the voice on the phone confirmed. "And he's coming for you. Goodbye, Mr. Rigo." The line went dead. Dante's men moved to intercept, but one look at Julio's face, that expression of controlled fury that had made him a legend, and they stepped aside. These were professional criminals. They knew the difference between a job and a suicide mission. Julio climbed the stairs with the patience of inevitability. Dante backed up until his spine hit the bar. "Look, Malone, whatever you heard, I heard you ordered 2 animals to beat my daughter unconscious." Julio's voice was conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "I heard you thought a waitress overhearing your amateur hour warehouse plans was worth attempted murder." The blood drained from Dante's face. "Your daughter?" No, man, I didn't know." "You didn't ask." Julio stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Dante could smell his cologne, expensive, understated, the scent of a man who didn't need to prove anything. "You saw a young woman trying to earn an honest living, and you decided her life was worth less than your paranoia. It was a mistake." "Yes, it was." Julio glanced around at Dante's men, all of whom were suddenly very interested in their shoes. "Your mistake. And you know what happens to men who make mistakes in my city?" Dante tried to swallow, but his mouth was desert dry. "Your city? Oh, did you think this was neutral territory?" Julio's smile was razor thin. "Did you think because I've been quiet the last few years that I'd disappeared, that my name didn't still mean something? I swear, Malone, I'll make it right." "You can't." Julio leaned in closer. "My daughter has 3 cracked ribs. Her face is so bruised she can't recognize herself in the mirror. She has nightmares about an alley behind a diner where men twice her size beat her for sport. You can't make that right." "Then what do you want?" "Everything." Julio straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with casual menace. "Your operation, your assets, your reputation. I want it all dismantled, brick by brick, until there's nothing left but a cautionary tale other idiots can learn from." Dante's last shred of bravado surfaced. "You can't just have protection cops, politicians." "Had," Julio corrected, past tense. "Torres and Russo are singing beautiful harmonies to Captain Morrison right now. Every cop you've bribed has been notified that their names are on federal warrants. Your political friends are drafting resignation letters. And your financial accounts?" He smiled. "Let's just say the IRS is very interested in your creative bookkeeping." Dante's legs gave out. He slumped against the bar, the reality crashing over him like a wave. You did all that in one night? I did all that in 6 hours. Julio turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Dante? Don't run. There's nowhere in this city, in this state, where my reach doesn't extend. Stay put. Face your consequences like a man. It's the only dignity you have left. What if I don't? Julio looked back over his shoulder, his eyes empty of everything except promise. Then I stopped being civilized about this. He descended the stairs, his men falling in behind him, leaving Dante Rigo alone in his crumbling kingdom, surrounded by loyalists who were already calculating their exits. As Julio stepped out into the night, Vincent appeared at his side. The DA's office just announced a grand jury investigation into Rigo's operations. Federal and local charges pending. Good. Julio pulled out his phone, checking a text from the hospital. Olivia was resting. Stable. Safe. What now? Boss? Julio looked up at the red neon sign above the red door, Dante's pride, his monument to himself, and smiled coldly. Now we make sure everyone in this city remembers what happens when you touch him alone. 3 days after the attack, Olivia woke to sunlight streaming through the hospital window and the quiet murmur of voices in the hallway. Her body still ached, a deep, pervasive pain that reminded her of every kick, every punch, but the morphine drip kept the worst of it at bay. The bruises on her face had deepened to purple and yellow, making her look like a stranger in the mirror the nurse had reluctantly shown her yesterday. She'd cried then. Not from vanity, but from the visceral reminder that she'd been helpless. Pray. Now, lying in the sterile quiet, she heard her father's voice through the partially open door. I don't care what the insurance says. She gets a private room for as long as she needs it. Julio's tone was firm but not aggressive, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. And Dr. Reeves checks on her twice daily minimum. Mr. Malone, hospital policy, is flexible when properly motivated. I've already spoken to the board. This isn't a negotiation. Footsteps retreated quickly, and Julio entered the room, his expression softening when he saw her awake. You heard that, he said, not quite a question. Hard not to. Olivia shifted carefully, wincing as her ribs protested. You don't have to bully people on my behalf. I'm not bullying. I'm ensuring adequate care for my daughter. He pulled a chair closer to her bed, settling into it with the weariness of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. She studied his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. When's the last time you slept? I'll sleep when you're home safe. Dad, don't. The word came out sharper than intended. He took a breath, softening. Don't tell me to rest when you're lying here because I failed to protect you. Olivia reached for his hand, her touch gentle on his scarred knuckles. This wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Julio's voice cracked around the edges. I kept my distance thinking it would keep you safe. But all I did was leave you vulnerable. No protection, no warning about what kind of world exists in the shadows. You were working at a diner in a neighborhood I should have known better than to. Stop. Olivia squeezed his hand. I chose to work there. I chose to live independently. You can't blame yourself for my decisions. You didn't choose to get beaten in an alley. No, she admitted quietly. I didn't. They sat in heavy silence until a soft knock interrupted them. Vincent appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet and looking uncomfortable about intruding. Boss, sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. Julio stood reluctantly, but Olivia spoke up. Whatever it is, I want to know too. I'm tired of being protected from information. Vincent glanced at Julio, who nodded slowly. Show her. Vincent approached, turning the tablet to display a bank statement. Your rent, Miss Malone, for the past 3 years. Olivia frowned at the screen. Her apartment in Riverside, the modest one-bedroom she'd been so proud to afford on her own, showed consistent monthly payments. Always on time, always the exact amount, but the payment source made her breath catch. Malone Property Management, LLC. You've been paying my rent, she whispered. The management company I own has been paying it. Julio corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. You were never late. You were never at risk of eviction. I just ensured the landlord had no financial motivation to make your life difficult. Vincent swiped to another screen. Your car insurance, paid in full annually. Dental work last year when you chipped your tooth. The new refrigerator when yours broke in January. Each revelation hit like a small earthquake, reshaping her understanding of the past 3 years. I thought I was doing it alone. You were, Julio said quickly. You worked those shifts, Earned those tips, built your life. I just removed some obstacles. Some obstacles? Olivia's voice rose despite the pain it caused her ribs. You've been controlling my entire life from the shadows. Not controlling. Protecting. What's the difference? I never told you where to live, where to work, who to see. I never interfered with your choices. I just made sure, his voice caught. I just made sure the world didn't crush you the way it crushed your mother. The mention of her mother softened Olivia's anger slightly. Mom knew about all of this. It was her idea. Julio returned to his chair, suddenly looking much older. Before she died, she made me promise 2 things. Keep you away from my world, but never truly abandon you. She said you'd hate me for the distance, but that hate was safer than the alternative. Olivia felt tears burning her eyes. I did hate you. I thought you just didn't care anymore. I cared too much. He met her gaze directly. Every birthday you thought I forgot? I called the diner, pretended to be a customer just to hear you wish me a good day. Every Christmas you spent alone? I was parked outside your building, watching you through the window, making sure you were safe even if you didn't know I was there. That's... Olivia struggled for words. That's really creepy, Dad. Despite everything, Julio's lips twitched with the ghost of a smile. Your mother said the same thing when I told her my plan. So all this time, you've had people watching me? Vincent cleared his throat. If I may, Miss Malone, your father maintained a very light security presence. The detective who patrolled your neighborhood, he was simply encouraged to be thorough. The owner of Rosie's Diner received a generous loan with favorable terms, in exchange for giving you good shifts. No one was invasive. We just created circumstances where you'd be safer. Rosie knows? Olivia felt her understanding of her life shifting further. She knows who my father is? She knows I'm a businessman who values her discretion, Julio said carefully. She doesn't know specifics, but she knows enough to be scared of you. Respect, Julio corrected. Not fear. There's a difference. Olivia leaned back against her pillows, exhausted by the revelations. I don't know how to feel about any of this. You don't have to decide now. Julio stood, gently brushing a strand of hair from her bruised forehead. Rest. Heal. Be angry with me if you need to. But know this, Livy. I would do it all again. Every secret, every hidden protection, every moment of watching from the shadows. Because you're alive, and you're here, and that's all that matters to me. What happens now? She asked softly. With Dante, with those men, with everything. Julio's expression hardened into something cold and final. Now? Now they face consequences, and you never have to be afraid again. While Olivia healed in her hospital room, Dante Rigo's world collapsed with methodical precision. It started with the money. At 6:47 a.m. on the 4th day after the attack, federal agents seized 3 of Dante's offshore accounts he'd thought were untraceable, buried under shell corporations and false names. 2 hours later, the IRS froze his domestic holdings, pending investigation into tax evasion charges that carried a 15-year minimum sentence. By noon, Dante's lawyer, the expensive one who'd kept him out of prison for a decade, called to inform him their retainer had been exhausted and he wouldn't be continuing representation. Nothing personal, the lawyer said, his voice tight with barely concealed fear. But I've been advised that representing you further would be inadvisable for my health. Dante knew exactly who had done the advising. His phone rang constantly now, panicked lieutenants reporting that their dealers were getting arrested. Their protection rackets were crumbling. Their bookies were disappearing. The corrupt cops who'd looked the other way for years were suddenly unreachable. Their phones disconnected. Their loyalty evaporated like morning dew. In 72 hours, Julio Malone had dismantled an empire that took Dante 5 years to build. And he'd done it without firing a single shot. Vincent stood in Julio's office, a legitimate office in a downtown building, far from the stereotypical backroom operations delivering the daily report. Dante's trying to reach out, Vincent said, scrolling through his tablet. 8 calls in the last hour. He wants to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. Julio signed a document transferring ownership of one of Dante's former properties, a warehouse that would now house a youth community center. Poetic justice. What else? The Patterson warehouse job is off. Dante's crew scattered when they realized we knew about it. Half turned themselves in for reduced sentences. The other half left the state. Good. What about the police investigation? Torres and Russo's testimony led to grand jury indictments. Dante's looking at conspiracy to commit assault, witness intimidation, racketeering, and about 15 other charges. DA says it's the easiest case she's prosecuted in years. Vincent paused. There's something else. Julio looked up, reading concern in his second-in-command's expression. Dante's desperate, cornered. We've taken everything from him except his freedom. And that's about to go too. Men like him don't go quietly. You think he'll make a move? I think he knows he's got nothing left to lose. Vincent pulled up a surveillance photo on his tablet. Dante leaving his apartment building at 4 a.m., looking haggard and wild-eyed. He's been asking around about Olivia, where she is, when she's being discharged. The air in the office grew colder. How many men do we have at the hospital? Julio's voice was dangerously quiet. 4 on rotation, 2 in the lobby, 2 on her floor. But boss, if he's planning something public, double it. And I want eyes on Dante every second. If he so much as looks in the direction of Mercy General, I want to know immediately. Vincent nodded and stepped toward the door, then hesitated. What are you going to do if he tries? Julio's expression was carved from stone. Whatever I should have done 4 days ago. Dante Rigo sat in his stripped-down apartment, everything of value already seized by federal agents, and stared at the single photograph in his hand, Olivia Malone, pulled from her social media before she'd locked down her accounts. She didn't look like someone who'd destroy a man's life. Just a young woman with her mother's smile, unaware of the power her last name carried. But she was the reason his empire was dust. She was the reason his money was gone, his connections severed, his future a prison cell. And Julio Malone, the ghost who'd emerged from retirement, had done it all for her. Dante's hands shook as he loaded bullets into a revolver he'd hidden from the raids. Cheap, untraceable, purchased years ago for emergencies. This qualified as an emergency. He'd lost everything trying to silence one waitress. Maybe if he finished the job, Julio would respect the conviction. Maybe they could negotiate then, one professional to another. Or maybe Dante was so far beyond rational thought that survival instinct had been replaced by spite. He stood, pocketed the gun, and headed for the door. Boss! Vincent's voice crackled through Julio's phone 20 minutes later. Dante just left his apartment, armed, heading east toward the hospital. Julio was already moving, grabbing his jacket. Alert the team. No one approaches Olivia's room except me. And Vincent, don't let him inside. I don't want my daughter seeing any more violence. What about Dante? I'll handle him personally. The drive to Mercy General took 8 minutes, 8 minutes where Julio's mind played through scenarios, contingencies, the exact words he'd use before ending this. He'd avoided violence his entire career when possible, preferring the surgical precision of financial and political pressure. But some men only understood one language. Dante Rigo had just proven he was one of them. Julio arrived as Dante's car pulled into the parking garage. 4 of his men were already in position, hidden but ready. Dante emerged from his vehicle, one hand inside his jacket where the gun would be, his movements jerky with adrenaline and desperation. He made it 15 feet before Julio stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. That's far enough. Dante spun, his hand moving toward the weapon, but froze when he saw Julio standing alone, unarmed, completely calm. You took everything from me. Dante spat, his voice raw. My business, my money, my reputation. You did that yourself, Julio interrupted quietly. The moment you decided my daughter's life was disposable. She's just a waitress. She's my daughter. Julio took 1 step forward, and Dante instinctively stepped back. And you're a small man who mistook my absence for weakness. That was your first mistake. Trying to kill her was your second. And coming here, to finish what you started? Another step. That's your last. Dante pulled the gun, his hands trembling so badly the barrel wavered. Stay back. Put it down, Dante. You're not a killer. You're a middle manager who got too ambitious. I'll do it. 4 red laser dots appeared on Dante's chest simultaneously, Vincent's men with precision rifles from 3 different angles. Dante looked down at the dots, then back at Julio, reality finally penetrating his desperation. You never had a chance, Julio said softly. Not against me, not in this city. I gave you the mercy of legal consequences, prison, a chance at eventual freedom, but you came here, to my daughter's hospital, with a gun. His eyes went dead. That mercy just expired. Dante's gun clattered to the concrete as his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, broken completely. Please, he whispered. Please, I'm sorry. Julio looked down at the pathetic figure before him and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Captain Morrison? Yes, he's here, armed, threatening. My men have him secured. He paused, listening. No, he won't be a problem anymore. As police sirens wailed in the distance, Julio walked past Dante without another glance, heading inside to check on the only person who mattered. His daughter was safe, and the monster who'd threatened her would spend the rest of his life in a cage, haunted by the memory of how completely Julio Malone had dismantled him. 5 days after the attack, Dr. Reeves signed Olivia's discharge papers with a stern warning about rest, physical therapy, and avoiding stressful situations. Olivia almost laughed at that last part. Her entire life had become a stressful situation. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, dressed in clothes Vincent had thoughtfully purchased, soft yoga pants, and an oversized sweater that didn't press against her healing ribs. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror still showed a stranger, yellow-green bruises fading around her eyes, a split lip nearly healed, but the fear in her gaze hadn't quite disappeared. Ready? Julio stood in the doorway, holding a small bag containing her belongings, her phone, keys, and the torn remains of her work uniform that she'd asked them to keep for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. I don't know, Olivia admitted. Am I going back to my apartment? That's your choice. But I'd prefer you stay somewhere with better security. At least until the trial. Your place? Julio hesitated, and in that pause, Olivia saw uncertainty, something she'd never associated with her father before. I have a house in Westridge, gated community, private security. You'd have your own wing, complete privacy. Or there's a corporate apartment downtown with 24-hour doorman and... Dad. Olivia stood carefully, testing her balance. Just ask me what you really want to ask. He met her eyes, and she saw vulnerability there that made him suddenly, startlingly human. I want you to come home with me. I want to make sure you're safe, that you're healing properly, that you're not alone when the nightmares come. His voice roughened. I want the chance to be your father again, even though I know I don't deserve it. Olivia felt tears prickling her eyes. You think you don't deserve it? I know I don't. I left you alone for 3 years. I let you believe I didn't care. And when you needed me most, you were there. She crossed to him, moving slowly but deliberately. You saved me, Dad. You stopped them. You made sure they'd never hurt anyone else. That's not failure. That's... She struggled for words. That's what fathers do. Julio's composure cracked. He pulled her into a careful embrace, mindful of her injuries, and she felt his shoulders shake with suppressed emotion. I'm so sorry, baby girl, he whispered against her hair. For everything. I know. And I forgive you. She pulled back to look at him. But Dad? No more secrets. No more watching from the shadows. If we're doing this, if I'm accepting who you are and what that means, then we do it honestly. No more secrets, he agreed. Starting now. The drive to Julio's house took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Olivia watched the city pass by her window, seeing it differently now. Every street corner could hide danger. Every stranger could be a threat. The attack had changed her perception of the world in ways she was only beginning to understand. You're quiet, Julio observed. Just thinking. She turned from the window. Vincent said you dismantled Dante's entire operation in less than a week. How is that even possible? Leverage and information. Julio navigated through tree-lined streets where houses sat behind high walls and private gates. Dante built his empire on corruption, paying off cops, bribing officials, exploiting weaknesses. All I did was expose those foundations and watch everything collapse. But you had the information ready, like you'd been watching him for a while. I watch everyone who operates in this city, Julio admitted. It's not paranoia if the threats are real. Dante was on my radar for months, as someone getting too ambitious, too reckless. I just hadn't had a reason to act until he hurt me. Yes, they pulled through a gate into a property that looked more like a small estate than a house. Manicured lawns, a fountain, and a modern 2-story home that somehow managed to look both impressive and inviting. This is where you live? Olivia asked, taking it in. This is where I sleep sometimes, Julio corrected. I wouldn't call it living. But maybe that changes now. Inside, the house was surprisingly warm hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, photographs on the walls that made Olivia stop in surprise. Her school pictures, her mother, candid shots of Olivia at various ages that she didn't remember anyone taking. You kept all of these, she whispered, touching a frame containing her high school graduation photo. I kept everything. Julio stood behind her, his reflection visible in the glass. Every report card, every drawing you made as a kid, every birthday card you gave me before. He trailed off. Before Mom died. Yes. Olivia turned to face him. I blamed you for her death. I thought the stress of your lifestyle. Whatever you really did, that's what killed her. It did, Julio said quietly. Not directly, but the worry, the fear of what my world might do to you, it ate at her. The cancer just finished what my choices started. That's not fair to yourself. Fair doesn't matter. True matters. And the truth is, your mother spent 15 years afraid that my enemies would discover she had a daughter, that you'd become a target. She was right to be afraid. His jaw tightened. Dante proved that. But he didn't know who I was when he gave the order, Olivia pointed out. I was just a waitress to him. That means the danger isn't really about being your daughter, it's about being a woman alone in a world where men like Dante think we're disposable. Julio studied her, something like pride flickering in his expression. When did you get so insightful? 5 days in a hospital bed gives you time to think. She moved through the living room, taking in more photos, more evidence of a life spent loving her from a distance. I'm not saying I'm not angry about the secrets, Dad. I am. But I'm starting to understand why you made the choices you did. That doesn't make them right. No, she agreed. But it makes them human. And I'd rather have a father who's human and flawed than one who's perfect and absent. A throat cleared behind them. Vincent stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable about interrupting. Sorry, boss. The security team needs your approval on the updated protocols. I'll be there in a minute. Julio turned back to Olivia. Your room is upstairs. Second door on the left. There's clothes in the closet. I had someone stock it based on what Vincent found in your apartment. If you need anything, I'll be fine, Dad. Go do your security thing. But as he moved to leave, she caught his arm. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Even the creepy surveillance stuff. His laugh was surprised and genuine. You're welcome. Even though it's still creepy. That night, Olivia woke screaming. The nightmare was visceral hands grabbing her, pavement scraping her skin, the taste of blood and fear. She thrashed against the blankets, fighting invisible attackers until strong hands gripped her shoulders. Livy! Olivia, wake up! You're safe. You're home. Her father's voice cut through the terror. She gasped, reality flooding back. She was in a bedroom at Julio's house, not an alley. Safe. Protected. I'm sorry, she managed, her voice shaking. I didn't mean to wake you. Don't apologize. Julio sat on the edge of her bed. His own sleep clearly interrupted. He wore a plain t-shirt and pajama pants, looking more like a regular father than a crime boss. The nightmares are normal after trauma. They'll fade with time. What if they don't? Then we'll deal with them together. There are therapists who specialize in PTSD, support groups for assault survivors. You don't have to face this alone. He hesitated. I had nightmares for years after my first two. After the first time I experienced real violence. Your mother used to sit with me until they passed. Olivia looked at him, seeing past the powerful reputation to the man beneath someone who'd survived his own traumas, his own demons. Will you stay? She asked quietly. Just until I fall back asleep? Of course. He settled into the chair beside her bed, and Olivia closed her eyes, focusing on the sound of his breathing, the presence of someone who wouldn't let anything hurt her. For the first time in days, she felt truly safe. And somewhere in that safety, she felt something else stirring, not just survival, but the first stirrings of strength. She'd been beaten, terrified, broken. But she was still here, still fighting, still Olivia Malone. And maybe, just maybe, that name meant something more powerful than she'd ever imagined. 2 weeks after her discharge, Olivia made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She was going back to work. Absolutely not, Julio said when she announced her intention over breakfast. You're still healing. The trial is in 3 weeks. There's no reason to. There's every reason, Olivia interrupted, setting down her coffee with deliberate calm. I can't hide in this house forever, Dad. That's not living. That's being a prisoner to fear. You were nearly killed. I know. I was there. She met his gaze steadily. But if I let that night define the rest of my life, then Dante wins. Those men win. And I refuse to give them that power over me. Vincent, who'd been reviewing security reports at the other end of the table, looked up with something approaching respect. She has a point, boss. Julio shot him a withering look, then turned back to Olivia. Rosie's diner isn't safe. Nowhere is completely safe, Olivia countered. But you've had people watching me for 3 years. I'm guessing you can arrange protection if I go back to work. I can arrange a small army if necessary. How about just 1 or 2 discreet professionals? She softened her tone. I need this, Dad. I need to prove to myself that I'm not broken, that I can still do normal things without falling apart. Julio was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed competing instincts, the need to protect Waring with respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded. 2 bodyguards, rotating shifts. They stay within visual range at all times, and if you feel unsafe for even a second, you leave immediately. No arguments. Deal. 3 days later, Olivia walked through the door of Rosie's diner for the first time since the attack. The breakfast rush was in full swing, the familiar chaos of clattering dishes, shouted orders, and the rich aroma of coffee and bacon that had once felt like home. Now it felt like a test she wasn't sure she'd pass. "Olivia!" Rosie emerged from the kitchen, her weathered face creasing with emotion. The 60-year-old owner pulled her into a careful hug. "Honey, you didn't have to come back so soon. Your position is secure. Take all the time you need. I need to be here," Olivia said, surprised by how much she meant it. "This place is part of my life. I'm not giving it up because of what happened." The other waitresses, Jenny and Maria, rushed over with similar expressions of concern and relief. The regular customers at the counter turned to look, some offering supportive smiles, others quickly averting their gazes with obvious discomfort. Word had spread. Everyone knew what happened to the quiet waitress who'd worked here for 2 years. The story had made local news. Woman attacked outside diner. Suspects arrested. What the news hadn't reported was who her father was, but the neighborhood knew. Rumors had a way of traveling faster than facts. "Table 7, Rosie said gently, handing Olivia an order pad. "Just like before. Take it slow." Olivia tied on her apron, a new one, since her old uniform had been torn beyond repair, and approached the corner booth. An elderly couple she recognized ordered pancakes and coffee with warm smiles that told her they were rooting for her recovery. The first hour was harder than she'd anticipated. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Every sudden movement in her peripheral vision made her flinch. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, and she had to force herself to breathe through the waves of anxiety. But she didn't leave. During her break, she stepped into the alley behind the diner, the same alley where she'd nearly died. 2 men stood at strategic positions, watching without watching, their presence both comforting and unsettling. Vincent's professionals. Olivia walked to the spot where she'd fallen, where blood had stained the pavement before rain washed it away. Someone had placed flowers there, a small memorial to violence survived. She stood there for a full minute, letting the memories wash over her without drowning in them. "You okay, miss?" One of the bodyguards had moved closer, concern evident despite his professional demeanor. "Yeah," Olivia said, and realized she meant it. "I'm okay." By the end of her shift, exhaustion pulled at her bones, but she felt something else too: pride. She'd done it. She'd returned to the scene of her trauma and reclaimed it as just another place, not a monument to fear. As she untied her apron in the break room, Rosie appeared with an envelope. "Your tips for today," the older woman said. "But Olivia, there's something you should know. Business has been different since you came back." "Different how?" "Better. People are coming in specifically because they heard you're working again. They want to support you, show solidarity. And," Rosie hesitated, "there are rumors about who your father is. Some people are coming out of curiosity, but others are coming because they respect what it means to survive, to fight back." Olivia opened the envelope and stared at the amount inside, triple her usual take. Tips from strangers who'd come to witness her return, to be part of her story of survival. "They're not just customers anymore," Rosie continued. "They're witnesses to your strength. The whole neighborhood is talking about Olivia Malone, the waitress who refused to be broken." The name hit her differently now. Malone. For so long, she'd thought of herself as just Olivia, separate from her father's legacy, distant from whatever power that name carried. But now she understood. The name wasn't a burden or a shield. It was simply who she was, the daughter of Julio Malone and Maria Chen, a young woman who'd survived violence and chosen to stand back up. Outside, Vincent was waiting by the car Julio had insisted on personal pickup for the first week. His expression was professionally neutral, but she caught the approval in his eyes. "How'd it go?" "Better than expected," Olivia admitted, sliding into the back seat. "Is my father at home?" "Office downtown. Big meeting about the waterfront development project." Vincent pulled into traffic. "Should I take you there or to the house?" "The house. I think I want to cook dinner tonight. Something normal." "Normal sounds good." As they drove through the city, Olivia watched the streets pass by her city, the place she'd lived her whole life but was seeing with new eyes. Every block held history now. Every corner could be dangerous or safe depending on circumstances beyond her control. But she also saw resilience. People going about their lives despite risk, despite fear, because that's what survival demanded. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Vincent says your first day went well. Proud of you, Livy." She typed back. "Thanks, Dad. See you at dinner? Wouldn't miss it." 3 simple words, but they carried weight neither of them could have imagined 3 weeks ago. They were building something new, a relationship based on honesty instead of distance, on presence instead of protection from afar. That evening, as Olivia moved around Julio's kitchen preparing pasta, her mother's recipe, the one family tradition she'd maintained, she felt the stirrings of something beyond survival. She felt like herself again, not the version from before the attack that Olivia was gone, transformed by violence into someone harder, more aware. But not a victim either. Something in between, someone who'd looked at darkness and chosen to walk back toward the light anyway. When Julio arrived home, drawn by the aroma of garlic and tomatoes, he stopped in the kitchen doorway with an expression of such profound emotion that Olivia had to look away or risk crying. "Your mother used to make that sauce," he said softly. "I know. She taught me when I was 12. Said every Malone woman should know how to make a meal that brings people together. She was right." Julio moved to the counter, rolling up his sleeves. "What can I do to help? Set the table?" 2 plates. As they worked in comfortable silence, father and daughter sharing space and purpose, Olivia realized this was what her mother had wanted all along. Not separation or distance, but connection. Family, home, outside, the city continued its endless rhythm of chaos and order, danger and safety, darkness and light. But inside, at a dinner table set for 2, Olivia Malone sat down with her father and took the first step toward healing. And the whole city would learn, eventually, that she wasn't just a victim who survived. She was a Malone who refused to be broken. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers when Olivia arrived for Dante Rigo's trial 6 weeks after the attack. She wore a simple navy dress and minimal makeup that couldn't quite hide the faint yellow remnants of bruising around her left eye. Her ribs had healed. The nightmares had diminished to once or twice a week, and she'd returned to work full-time at Rosie's Diner, with bodyguards who'd become familiar faces in the neighborhood. But today was different. Today she would face her attackers in court and tell her story to a jury that would decide their fate. Julio walked beside her, his presence a shield against the chaos of media attention. Vincent and 2 others formed a protective perimeter as they navigated through the crowd, ignoring shouted questions about mob connections and revenge justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and formal. Dante sat at the defense table looking gaunt and defeated, his expensive suit doing nothing to restore the swagger he'd lost along with his empire. Torres and Russo had already pleaded guilty in separate proceedings, their testimony secured in exchange for reduced sentences. But Dante had refused to cooperate, convinced he could still win despite mountains of evidence. He was wrong. The prosecution's case was devastating in its precision. Financial records showing Dante's criminal enterprises, testimony from former associates who'd turned state's evidence, surveillance footage placing him at key locations. And most damning, the detailed confessions from Torres and Russo describing exactly how Dante had ordered Olivia's assault and why. When it was Olivia's turn to testify, her legs felt unsteady as she approached the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in, her hand trembling slightly on the Bible. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, who'd built her career on organized crime cases, approached with a gentle but professional demeanor. "Miss Malone, can you tell the court what happened on the night of October 17th? Olivia took a breath and began speaking. The words came easier than she'd expected, clinical details about her shift at the diner, about overhearing conversations she didn't fully understand, about closing alone and walking toward her car. Then the alley, the hands grabbing her, the first punch. She didn't cry as she described the beating, though her voice wavered. She met the jury's eyes directly, showing them her truth without embellishment or drama. They said no one would care about a waitress, Olivia continued, her voice growing stronger. That I was nobody. That I should have kept my mouth shut about things that didn't concern me. And did you intentionally eavesdrop on Mr. Rigo's conversation? No. I was refilling coffee and cleaning tables. It was my job to be nearby. If they wanted privacy, they should have chosen a different venue. Several jury members nodded slightly. The defense attorney, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tried to shake her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting she'd misidentified her attackers, that the attack might have been random violence unconnected to Dante. Olivia remained calm, her answers consistent and clear. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, she felt lighter. The truth was out there now, recorded in official transcripts, witnessed by a room full of strangers who would carry her story forward. She took her seat beside her father in the gallery. Julio reached over and squeezed her hand, once a gesture of pride and support that needed no words. The trial continued for 3 more days. Expert witnesses, forensic evidence, character testimonies that painted Dante as a violent opportunist who'd mistaken ambition for intelligence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, Olivia felt her heart hammering as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of criminal racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. The list continued: 12 charges, 12 guilty verdicts. Dante's face went gray as the weight of his future crashed down. His lawyer was already discussing appeals, but everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. Dante Rigo would spend the next 25 years minimum behind bars, and by the time he got out, if he got out, the world he'd known would have moved on without him. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward again, but this time Olivia stopped instead of rushing past. "Miss Malone, how do you feel about the verdict?" one shouted. She looked directly at the cameras, thinking about every woman who'd been told she was nobody, every victim who'd been silenced by fear or shame. "I feel like justice was served," she said clearly. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been targeted because someone thought they were powerless. I'm grateful to the jury, to the prosecution, and to every person who refused to let this crime be swept away and forgotten." "Is it true your father is Julio Malone, the alleged organized crime figure?" Olivia glanced at Julio, who remained impassive, then back at the reporter. "My father is Julio Malone, a businessman who loves his daughter enough to ensure she gets justice when the system fails to protect her. That's all I have to say." She turned and walked away, ignoring the follow-up questions, feeling Julio's proud presence beside her. 3 months after the trial, Olivia stood at her mother's grave with fresh flowers, white roses, Maria's favorite. The headstone was simple: Maria Chen Malone, beloved wife and mother, 1978 to 2022. Julio stood beside her, his hands in his coat pockets against the autumn chill. "I've been thinking about what Mom said before she died," Olivia began, her voice quiet. "About keeping me away from your world, letting me be normal. She wanted you safe. I know. But Dad, I don't think normal exists for anyone. We all face danger in different forms. Random violence, illness, accidents. The only difference is some of us know where the threats come from." Julio looked at her curiously. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to pretend anymore that my last name doesn't mean something. I'm a Malone, your daughter, and instead of running from that or hiding from it, I want to understand it, own it." She turned to face him fully. "I want you to tell me the truth about who you are, what you do, all of it. No more protected ignorance. Livy, once you know certain things, I can't unknow them, I understand. But I'd rather face reality with open eyes than live in comfortable delusion. That's what got me hurt in the first place, not knowing enough to recognize danger." Julio was quiet for a long moment, looking at his daughter with an expression that mixed pride, concern, and something like relief. "Your mother would say I'm making a mistake. Mom wanted me safe more than she wanted me strong. But maybe I need to be both." "All right," Julio agreed finally. "The truth, all of it. But not today. Today, we remember your mother and the sacrifices she made to give you the chance at a good life." "She gave me more than that," Olivia said, looking back at the headstone. "She gave me roots strong enough to survive when everything else was stripped away. She gave me you, even if it took a tragedy to bring us back together." They stood in silence as the afternoon light filtered through autumn leaves, casting golden patterns across the grave. Finally, Julio spoke. "I've been thinking about expanding our legitimate business operations. Property development, community investment, that sort of thing. I could use someone with fresh perspective, someone who understands what working people actually need. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. Keep waitressing if that's what makes you happy. I'll support it completely. Or come work with me, learn the business, help me build something that does good instead of just avoiding harm." Olivia considered this, thinking about Booth 7 at Rosie's, about tips and coffee stains, about the simple satisfaction of honest work. Then she thought about leverage and power, about being able to help people on a larger scale, about understanding her father's world from the inside. "Can I do both?" she asked. Keep a few shifts at the diner, but also work with you? I don't want to lose that connection to regular people, to remember what normal actually looks like. Julio smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from intimidating to almost gentle. You can do whatever you want, Livy. You're a Malone. That means you write your own rules. As they walked back toward the car, Olivia felt the final pieces of her new identity settling into place. She wasn't the same person who'd walked into that alley 6 months ago. That Olivia, naive, isolated, convinced she could separate herself from her heritage, was gone. In her place stood someone harder but not cruel, aware but not paranoid, strong enough to accept help and brave enough to offer it. The city spread out before them as they drove back through familiar streets, the same city where she'd been beaten, where she'd survived, where she'd learned that her name carried weight she was only beginning to understand. What happens now? She asked, echoing the question she'd posed in the hospital all those weeks ago. Julio glanced at her, his expression peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. Now we live, Livy, together, honestly, and anyone who threatens that learns exactly what it means to cross a Malone. Both of us? Both of us, he confirmed. Olivia settled back in her seat, watching the city lights begin to glow in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, working, loving, struggling, surviving, just like her. She'd been beaten, she'd been broken, she'd been told she was nobody, but she'd survived all of it and emerged stronger, carrying her mother's compassion and her father's steel. She was Olivia Malone, and the whole city would learn, eventually, that she wasn't just the waitress who got attacked. She was the daughter who refused to stay down, the woman who turned her trauma into testimony, her fear into strength, her victim status into victory. She was blood and loyalty, kindness and power, vulnerability and steel. She was exactly who she needed to be, and that was enough. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.